And let me welcome everybody. Let me welcome you to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm your host, MC, and cat herder for this hour. I'm very glad to hear and see everybody here today. Welcome. Before we begin, let me introduce the program, where it came from, who supports it, and how it works. So, again, this is the Future Trends Forum. This is a discussion session. This is a way of exploring the future of education and technology through conversation, not through presentation. If you haven't seen it, it's the discussion spinoff from the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. That's a monthly publication where we take a look at major trends reshaping education, especially involving technology. We've been doing it for several years now. We have about 83 trends that we track closely. If you haven't seen it, go to ftte.us and check out some issues, or go to hashtag FTTE and see the conversations that are happening along that line on Twitter. Now, an important detail about this is that our conversation is global and international in scope. We often tend to focus in education on our region, on our nation, but it's really important to recall that the major forces shaping education really are transnational. And this conversation tries to reflect that. And you can see from this map that we've had participants from just about every place in the world. In fact, this map is a little old. We have had participation from Africa, as well as from South America, all over North America, all over Europe, Central, Eastern Asia, and Australia. Now, we can only hold this kind of conversation with the help of some very generous sponsors, and I want to thank them and explain the technology as well. So, to begin with, we're grateful to NYSERNet in New York State, and it's a nonprofit that helps wire up that state's colleges, museums, libraries, and universities. We're thankful to them for their support. We're also very grateful to Shindig, because as you can tell, Shindig makes available this very technology. And if you haven't had a chance to use this, or if you haven't used it lately, let me just quickly show you how to interact. Now, I'm speaking to you, and there's a PowerPoint presentation next to me, which will go away in just a minute, because this is really not a presentation. Up here where I am, this is called the stage, and this is where I will be for the next hour. This is where our guest will be in just a couple of minutes. This is also where you can join us, and you can talk with us and converse. Let me explain. Look at the very bottom of the screen. There's a white strip that runs along it. On the left edge of it, you'll see some human head silhouettes and a number that tells you how many people are here in the session. And if you click that, you can take a look at all the people who are here. And next to that is the first of three different ways you have to interact. There's what looks like a kind of comic book or cartoon chat box. That's a text window. And if you click that, you'll get a chat box that pops open, lets you chat with the nearest 18 or 20 people who have come in with you. And if you've ever done this, you'll see already one. In my chat room, we have Tom Hames, we have Fred Bashirs, we have Patty, all talking about everything from movies to where they are. Patty, greetings. Welcome from Dallas. I bet you it's a little warm there right now. So you can use the chat box throughout the hour. Now, next to that, on the white strip, you'll see a question mark in the middle of the circle. If you click that, up will pop a text box and you can type in a question or a comment. Now, if you do that, we can play it on the screen so everyone can see it, and I'll read it out loud so everyone can hear it. Now, next to that on the white strip, you'll see a little hand. If you click that, that tells us that you'd like to come to join us on stage. So if your microphone is working, if your camera is working, if your bandwidth is working, and you're in a place where you can talk out loud, like where I am now, click that and we can let you join us on stage. If you haven't done it before, it's really easy. And you'll see that people often flock up on stage. We have four of us having a conversation. So again, we want to make sure that we have as much conversation and discussion as possible. We're grateful to Shindig for making this technology available. We're also grateful to our supporters on Patreon. If you haven't seen it, Patreon is a crowdfunding sort. Like, say, GoFundMe or like Kickstarter, it lets people fund creators making stuff. In this case, Patreon lets people fund me as I make media for the future of education. So that goes to support the projects here in the Future Transform, the monthly FTTE report, our book club, all kinds of projects and work. We're grateful to the dozens of people who contribute there on Patreon. If you haven't been there before, go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander, and we're grateful for anything that you can provide. Now, that's what this technology is. That's where it comes from. That's how we're trying to structure this conversation. Let's plunge into today's session. We're very, very excited to have one of the heroes for me in higher education, Matt Reed. He is currently the Vice President for Learning at Brookdale Community College. And I think he is the most visible, the most passionate, the most articulate, and also the funniest person who writes about community colleges and higher education. And you have to think that in the United States, almost half of our students go through community colleges. Community colleges perform a heroic job of educating enormous amounts of students, and they are, for most of us, the most affordable way to access post secondary education. And yet, they do not receive the lion's share of media attention and discussion that they are entitled to. So I'm really glad to have Matthew here to speak about community colleges. And as we go, keep in mind, I have a raft of questions to ask, but I'm sure that you will have other questions and comments you'd like to raise. So to begin with, should I call you Dean Reed, Dean Dad, or Matthew with a good beard?
Matt is fine, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Matt. I'm so. Oh God, you get that welcome, Matt, all the time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Um, I'm really glad you made the time. I know you're an incredibly busy person as a dean, and with your very energetic writing schedule and speaking schedule, I'm really grateful for this hour.
I'm happy to be here,
Um,
thanks.
well, let me begin by asking. Your title is a little unusual, the Vice President for Learning. Does that mean you're the Vice President for Academic Affairs? You're basically a provost, or do you have a different charge than that?
It's academic affairs.
Very good. So you get to be the dean over how many students go through your institution now?
We have about 13,000 students on the credit bearing side at this point. A little bit off the
Excellent.
peak. It peaked at about 15,000, but still substantial.
And was the peak, say, 2010 or so?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
community colleges enrollments tend to be countercyclical to the economy. So when a recession hits, our enrollments go up. Economic recovery means our enrollments go down.
Okay. So good news for most people is bad news for you. That's understandable.
Yeah, it's sort of counterintuitive.
You guys are demonic. You're like the joke. But let me ask. I mean, the purpose of the forum is to think about the future of education, and obviously, community colleges play a huge role in that. So, thinking ahead, if we look ahead, say, 15 years, if we think about an economy with peaks and valleys, do you see that
Right.
community colleges will continue to grow, peaking as the economy hits a dangerous spot, sloughing off a little bit as the economy builds?
I think some of that is inevitable because when the economy slumps, for many people, the opportunity cost of an education goes down. In other words,
Yeah.
if we're competing with going to work, that's one thing. But if we're competing with staying at home and watching TV, that's another thing. So when there are few jobs to be had, it's easier to go back to school. So that's when we tend to get the most people. When there are plenty of jobs to be had, some of the folks who would really rather work go to work, which is
Hmm.
understandable. So I don't see that part changing. I'm not
Hmm.
rooting for a recession, certainly, but I imagine they will happen because they do.
Hmm.
I think institutionally, though, there's going to be an evolution, and I imagine it's going to be very different by region. Um,
What do you mean?
well, part of that has to do with the historic mission of community colleges. Um, they were about half of the community colleges in America were established in the 1960s, including Brookdale. And at
Hmm.
that point, the geographic distribution of wealth in America was as equal as it had ever been or will ever be.
Yeah.
Since then, community colleges are geographically spread out, but wealth is geographically concentrating, which means for a lot of community colleges, either they're coming in sort of below the wealth level of their community or way above the wealth level of their community.
Mm.
It's harder to fit because they were built to educate a broad middle class. And we increasingly don't have that. We increasingly have the two extremes. And we were built for the middle. So we're kind of stretched. On the one hand, we have very well prepared students who treat us as the first year or two of a 4-year degree, which is great. Happy to do it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have a whole bunch of students who either are going straight for work, which is fine,
Hmm.
or in many cases, we're kind of their only option. And maybe they came out of a high school that was struggling, that was underfunded, that really felt sort of the bad end of polarization. And so the
Mm.
academic preparation may or may not be all that strong. They may or may not have had adult mentors to kind of guide them into professions. But we're being increasingly subjected to what's called performance funding, which is legislatures basing our appropriations on statistics that were generally drawn up by people who went to four-year schools.
Mhm.
So you'll hear, you have a 27% graduation rate. That's terrible. Actually, for a community college, that's above average. That's pretty good because most of our students are not full-time, and we take anybody who shows up. A school for which all of the students are full-time and they can exclude anyone risky will have a much higher grad rate, just by definition. The measure doesn't really make sense for us, but that's increasingly being used, whether in the name of accountability or, as I suspect, at some level being punitive. And so we're at this funny point where the people in community colleges, people who work in them, are often much more motivated by concerns about equity and social justice than perhaps in the past, because we see the consequences of lacking equity and lacking social justice. We see it every day. But the legislators who set our budgets are frequently ideologically committed to, as they would say, rewarding winners. So we're kind of producing a middle class, or trying to produce a middle class, for a country that no longer wants to bother creating one. And that's a very difficult spot to be in.
It is. You're really torn. I mean, you have to serve now basically what should we say, the working class plus the lower class?
Well, we like to say that we take the top 100% of our applicants. Now, if you look at the demographics of our
As
applicants,
opposed to the bottom 100%. Yeah.
if you look at the demographics of our applicants, they tend to be older than at a four-year school. Typically, our median age is typically in the mid-20s. They tend to be lower income. They tend to be more female, and they tend to be much more racially diverse than students at typical four-year schools. Some have argued, and I think there's warrant for this, that to the extent that we reflect diversity, we get punished financially. The whiter the school, the higher the funding, to put it bluntly. I think that works on a national level. I'm not sure it works on a state level. I was recently in New Hampshire. Every school there is white. You can't explain.
Well, it's New Hampshire.
Yeah, or Vermont, where you are.
Yep.
You can't really explain it that way. But nationally, I think it pretty much holds. So yeah, we see the consequences of polarization every single day. And our job, as we see it internally, is to bring in the folks, no matter where they start, get them all up to a level where they can compete with everybody else, no matter where everybody else started. And that's a hard job.
It's really hard. You guys do that like nobody's business. I mean, that's, I think, for me, one of the great triumphs of the community college system. Friends, I have a whole series of questions I want to press on poor Matt. But let me just remind you that all those technologies are available for you to throw questions and comments. We've already had some discussion, Matt, in the chat box where a veteran of a Texas community college said 20% is awesome. One community college he used to work at had less than, or just about half of that. So that's an important difference to ask. Let's come back up to a couple of your excellent points. You mentioned geographical distribution. Do you think that we will find, say, community colleges beginning to sprout and grow in the southeast and the southwest, where we're having what remains of population growth in the U.S.? Or do you think we'll see community colleges move away from high-income areas like, say, Manhattan, San Francisco, or parts of Chicago? Do you see any other way the geographical distribution of community colleges will change looking ahead?
I don't see a lot of closures or openings. I do see expansion and contraction.
Okay.
For example, in Connecticut, sort of in between us,
One of
the way they have a declining number of 18-year-olds, which is actually true throughout most of the Northeast. And one of the ways they're handling it is by trying to consolidate all of their community colleges under one president.
Yep.
Their argument is that they can save administrative costs by basically getting rid of administration at 14 out of the 15 colleges. I'm not a big fan of that strategy for a whole host of reasons. But I think that's a harbinger. In New
Mm,
Jersey, two of our sister community colleges have been merged with the four-year school.
mm.
Burlington County and Gloucester County community colleges are now part of Rowan University. Rowan sees them as feeders, kind of like the farm team. The community colleges saw Rowan as a financial savior. It was a way to get out of the ditch. I see a lot of that going forward, a lot of consolidation, colleges merging with each other, merging across sectors. It's going to be harder, especially in low enrollment areas, I think, for the smaller ones to sustain themselves as independent, autonomous institutions.
Mm-hmm. And then you do see expansions happening in, say, Florida or Virginia or Arizona.
Some of that is happening. They typically they're pretty much done opening campuses. That's largely over. A lot of the
Mm-hmm.
expansion happens either through adding capacity to existing campuses or online. There's quite a bit of online. In the South, there's also a major expansion through what's called dual enrollment, which is teaching courses in high school to high school students. So a local community college might run classes in a local high school. That counts toward the community college enrollment, but they don't have to build a campus for it.
We saw some of that in California as well.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
the chat box, Tom mentions something that I was drawing attention to in Wisconsin, where the state kind of just folded a whole bunch of community colleges, to use a different term, into local four-year universities.
Yeah, they kind of like hub and spoke kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And the argument there again was demographic. The chancellor of the system said had this outrageous figures, like 95% of population growth that they expected will be ages 65 and up. That they were basically running out of people in their 20s. Um,
Yeah, that's
and
our core
so,
demographic. Yeah.
yeah. So geographically, we can expect contractions and expansions along these lines. Um, I'm thinking more about other changes. A few months ago, we had as our guest Tressie Cottom, who was the great expert in for profits. And
Press
one
is
of her
great.
arguments is, she is, that for her, the major competition for profits was community colleges.
Yeah.
How do you see that changing over the next 10 years or so? I mean, do you think the for profit sector, which has just collapsed, do you think it's going to get reinflated under Trump and DeVos, excuse me, or do you think it'll keep going, or will they shift and take aim at another sector to compete with?
Full confession: I used to work at DeVry back in the day,
That's
from
right.
1990
That's right.
to 2003. So I am familiar with the for-profit sector firsthand. My sense is it too will evolve. I think it started with trying to imitate the nonprofit sector. So you had
Mm-hmm.
these freestanding buildings called campuses that called themselves colleges that had credits and classes and so forth. I think what you're going to see is less of that because they kind of hit the wall in terms of what they can do with that. And they're going to move into providing services within either corporate training or within niches within community colleges and state colleges. What I mean by that is something like Pearson.
Interesting.
Pearson is a for-profit
Mm-hmm.
college in everything but name. It provides learning platforms, it provides texts, it provides tests, it provides all of the things a college would provide other than faculty in a building and an accreditation, I guess. Um, a lot of colleges have had to outsource a lot of their operations in order to survive financially. And outsourcing can be seen as an investment opportunity. The
Mm-hmm.
private sector is always looking for places to pick up opportunity. On my own campus, we outsourced food service a few years ago. So now we have a food service company that comes in and does that. And when it comes to something like food service, I don't have an ideological issue with it. When you get more to the core of what we do, it becomes a little bit more difficult. But I do see less of the imitation model, I guess, and more of the infiltrating model. They're going to become more a part of what we do, for better or worse. And I think it's some of both. Um, but I think they did hit the wall in terms of how much they can imitate what we do, in part because community colleges and state colleges had to become more efficient to survive. So some of the low-hanging fruit that they could pick in terms of efficiency isn't there anymore. It's been picked. Um, Obviously the Trump administration is more favorable to the for-profit sector than the Obama administration was.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, they would still have to convince investors that it's a safe bet. And based on how badly that sector failed in the last few years, I think that's an uphill battle. But if it's providing services to colleges in the form of LMS or ERP or whatever it is, that's a much safer bet. So if I were a for-profit education investor, I wouldn't be looking at starting a college. I'd be looking at providing services to existing colleges.
That's pretty important. That's a huge difference. It also reminds me of MOOCs, which have made that pivot towards both towards corporate
Exactly.
training and also to
Exactly
making pieces of. We have a great question from one of our participants whose camera isn't working, so I have to read it out loud for you. It's from
right.
Jim
Okay.
Holton. It says studies have indicated that Generation Z is more cost conscious than some prior generations. Do you see an increase in community college registrations due to that fact?
Surprisingly, no. And I think you're right that today's millennials are cost conscious. My son is 16, and he is already talking about, starting the college search, and he's already talking about avoiding a heavy student loan burden.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 16, that didn't even cross my mind. That was not a thing. Now it's a thing. Having said that, though, community colleges tend to be having, over the past several years, our enrollments have dropped.
Right.
Part of that is four-year schools increasingly fishing in our pond, lowering their standards as they need to in order to make their numbers. But I think part of that, and this is how for-profits survive, we have not been super great about explaining the savings. Tressie likes to make the argument, and I think she's spot on, that one of the ways that for-profits succeed in recruiting low-income students, or succeeded when they did, they don't have application fees.
Yep.
To a student who's couch surfing or barely making it on minimum wage, a $20,000 student loan is monopoly money. It's funny money. It's theoretical. But a $50 application fee is this week's food.
Yep.
They were very good at figuring that out. One of the tricks that four-year schools like to use is they'll say, we'll offer you a $50,000 scholarship to come here. What they don't say is that's out of $200,000. And so I've actually had students say, well, I have to go to the four-year school. They gave me all this money.
Right.
And I want to respond, well, how much do you have to pay? That's the relevant figure. What they're giving you is a discount. And 25% off is great if you can afford the remaining 75%. But if you can't,
it's like the old the business sale joke, right? They increase the cost 30% and say now 10% off.
Exactly.
It's true.
Exactly.
It's true.
Yeah, they're very good at that. And we have been sort of naively transparent in our pricing. We haven't pulled a lot of those same tricks. Now, some would argue that free community college is kind of the trick. That's catching on in various states.
Tennessee, New York.
Yeah. We don't have that in New Jersey yet, although we have a gubernatorial election coming up in a few weeks, and one of the candidates has endorsed the concept of free community college. Phil Murphy, the Democrat. Phil Murphy is the Democrat.
Thank you.
He hasn't defined what it means, though, nor has he particularly spent a lot of time on it. And it can mean a lot of different things. Tennessee, I think, does the gold standard. They do it really well. They've dedicated funding from a lottery stream, so they don't have to renew it every year. And it applies to both recent high school grads and returning adults. They've done it intelligently. Some other states, like New York, Rhode Island, amazingly, did it with residency requirements, where if you get 2 years of aid, then after you graduate, you have to stay in the state for 2 years. The fact that Rhode Island did that, I think, is sort of amazing. Rhode Island's small. There's not a lot of options in Rhode Island. I'm not a big fan of, tie the peasants to the land. I'm not into that.
I was cutting edge circa 950 AD. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I don't know. I like to think of education as setting people free, not tying them down. So I would prefer that we provide the support up front and then let people kind of fly where they will. Having said that, if you are going to stay there anyway, I could see, making the calculation that, well, if I'm staying around anyway, and most community college grads do stay in the general area they went to school. If you're staying anyway, then the residency requirement doesn't really matter. And if that means you get a couple of years free, why not? I can absolutely see the argument.
Well, it's a good one. I should just throw in one personal detail, and people here know I almost never do this. My daughter went to community college for her first 2 years
Okay.
because she, again, like your son, was very conscious about cost savings and was very worried about debt, and had a terrific experience. And
Right.
then moved on to a 4 year university. Um, we have more questions coming though before I can ask my own. Tara, what's the next one from Trevor or from Jim, please? Trevor Griffey asks, community colleges have largely deprofessionalized their faculty. That is, at least 2/3 of their teachers are adjuncts who don't make a living wage. How does that impact their teaching mission? Challenging question, Trevor.
It's a fair point. At Brookdale, about half of our credits are taught by adjunct faculty, and I'm not going to
Wow.
pretend for a minute that our adjunct rates come anywhere close to being proportional in terms of pay. No, that's a real problem, and that is directly a funding issue. And I would attribute it mainly to two factors. The first is just lack of funding in the first place, but the other is health insurance. To give you an example from Brookdale, last year our institutional health insurance bill went up 13%. Our state
13
13, 1-3.
in
Our
one
state
year.
funding, yes, our state funding was flat. Our county funding was flat. Our enrollment went down,
Right.
and our health insurance went up 13%. I challenge anyone who's capable of doing math to make that work. Spin that out over 5 years, and you really see it is not a sustainable solution. Part of the appeal of adjuncts is you don't have to pay benefits.
Right.
So by having fewer people get health insurance, you can offset some of the cost increase. It went up 13% for the people who have it, but if 5% fewer people have it, you can take the edge off that way. I'm not a fan of that. I will say I'm not categorically opposed to the concept of adjuncts, because you
Nobody
do
is.
sometimes have working professionals who like to teach a class at night to stay active, and that's great. If Jim McGreevy wants to come and teach a class on the politics of New Jersey, bring it. I have no problem with that. And in a field like music, we're never going to have enough flute majors to ever have a full-time flautist position. So if we're going to have someone teach flute, it's going to be an adjunct. That also works with certain languages. We're not going to have full-time Japanese anytime soon.
Right.
So, and then there is enrollment fluctuation. So it's not that we could necessarily eliminate the category, or that we didn't want to. But I fully agree that it's much bigger than it should be, and that it does have an impact. The better community colleges at least try to support adjuncts with professional development and try to adopt processes and procedures that are fair.
Mm-hmm.
But I will concede up front, the wages are not fair. You're right.
But Trevor's question was partly that, but he also had an angle which approaches the rest of your position, which is how does this impact their teaching mission? Um,
Yeah,
it's a deep question.
it is, and it's hard to measure, particularly in a environment such as this, where the full-time faculty have tenure and a union, and so one could argue are largely immune from any kind of performance measurement.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's very difficult to do an apples to apples comparison. The closest I can come to that is saying I have seen adjuncts who were extraordinary, and I've seen adjuncts who were not. I've seen full timers who were extraordinary, and I've seen full timers who were not. The difference is when the full timer is not, there's not a lot you can do about it. With the adjunct, there is. Different colleges take different approaches in terms of measuring quality. We always do in-person observations, and I've instructed the deans not to use grade distribution as a criterion.
That's
So
very powerful.
we don't fire faculty for failing students. And I've told them up front, the reason for that is we live and die by transfer. if we pass students who are not really capable because we're afraid to fail anybody, and then they go to the four-year school and they all crash and burn, we're jeopardizing our transfer relationship with that four-year school. At a certain level, we're jeopardizing our reason to exist. So I see, defensive grade inflation as an existential threat and something to fight. I've been gratified to notice, though, if you look at the literature on grade inflation in higher ed, it's not community colleges that have done it. It's primarily the selective four-year schools. Grade inflation is an issue at Harvard and Yale. It is not an issue at Brookdale or Bunker Hill, which I think is interesting. And it somewhat problematizes the narrative that grade inflation is a function of having too many adjuncts. Harvard and Yale have far fewer adjuncts than we do, but they give way more A's than we do.
That's very comforting. Trevor, what a powerful question. Thank you for asking that. I'm really glad you brought that up. We have more questions queued up. Ken O'Connor wants to join us on stage. Let's see if we can beam him up. If all the bells come together. Actually, bells shouldn't come together. I mean, if all the bells can ring at the same time. Hello, Ken.
Hey, hello. How you guys doing? Can you hear me okay?
And how are you?
Yeah. Where are you, Ken?
Great. Hey, I'm in Rutherford, New Jersey. New Jersey.
Hey. Excellent.
Yeah. I'm from the state. This is really exciting for me, Matt Reed. I've been following your stuff since at least 2010 as Dean Dad. I'm an independent consultant. I work in the technology education space. And I remember before your name, it's Matt Reed. It was just Dean Dad. It's like the secret. Who is this guy, Dean Dad? So really cool, great work. But my question is, first up, you guys brought up some great points about what I see being the tragedy of the commons. In an effort to please so many people in the former middle class, we've used community college to help them learn. But in an effort to try to help so many people, we've kind of lost our way because, when you try to please too many people, it becomes difficult to actually achieve a singular goal. So I'm wondering if you could start over the community college system today, what do you think you would do to help improve the process and the program? I mean, there's institutional issues, there's federal, state funding issues, there's all these different things. And now you're very experienced. How do you think if we had to start community colleges over again today, we could do it? What do you think about that?
That's a good one. Well, the easy start would be parity in per student funding across sectors. Rutgers gets several multiples of what we get per student per year. And it's very, very difficult to provide a comparable experience on 1/5 of the money. That's really hard to do. Part of that, you compensate where you can, but you can only take that so far. That's a good one. I would break down the distinction between workforce development programs and transfer programs. There's this widespread belief that it's one or the other. And a college that does transfer isn't helping students get jobs, and a college that helps students get jobs is a trade school, not a college. And to me, that's a false dichotomy. The fact is, a lot of jobs require a bachelor's degree or higher, which means that helping students transfer to get the bachelor's degree or higher is a form of workforce development. But for some reason, that's been very hard to communicate to funders. They just haven't figured that one out yet. The exciting thing about community colleges to me is the equity mission. And if you ask around campus, what's the one thing that ties us all together? It's the concern for social equity. The earlier question got to, well, what about your faculty? Yeah, I mean, that's right. That's absolutely correct. I can't disagree. That's a hell of a question, though. I'd have to give it some serious thought. You may have given me a blog post. Thank you for that. To think that one through.
I'll be looking for that blog post.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you very much. Good to see you. We have still more questions coming up. And Tara, why don't you flash up the first one that is on the stack? This is from Jim Holton, who wants to know great question. Where do community colleges fit in regarding online learning? Good question.
Oh, there you go. Most of the community colleges that I know have online courses, and many of them have entirely online degrees, including Brookdale. We actually have a dean in charge of the online area. We have a teaching and learning center to help faculty develop, design, refine their online courses. We have an instructional designer full-time on staff, and we're hiring another one. I even established, when I got here, a thing called the Sandbox, which is a room full of tech with an instructional designer, so that faculty can go sort of play with the tech toys outside of the view of students. Because I know as a student, there's nothing more frustrating than watching a professor mess with the laptop trying to get PowerPoint to work for 10 minutes. If they can practice outside of the view of students, learn what makes sense for them, and then take it into the classroom once they're good at it, I think it fits better. Online learning is part of our access mission. Part of the point of community colleges is to provide access to higher education to anybody who wants it. Sometimes people can't get to a campus because of work demands, sometimes family issues, sometimes transportation issues, sometimes physical disabilities. There are a host of reasons. We did a survey of our online students about a year ago to look at how they differ from our on-site students demographically. Two major findings. The first is that most of our on-site students are also online students, and vice versa. It's not so much that most students are one or the other, most are both. We have a lot of students who take 3 classes on the campus and then 1 or 2 online. And they'll do that to make their schedule work around a job. So it's not so much one or the other. It's kind of a way to, if they take classes Monday through Wednesday, then they have a couple of days to work for money, and then the weekend. That's fairly common. I forget where I was going with the other piece. Yeah,
Well,
I had it, lost it. It'll come back.
It's okay. I can prod you a little bit with that. How do you see that changing over the next 10 years or so?
Oh, right. Well, it's growing. Our overall enrollment here and nationally is dropping, but our online enrollment is growing. And when we did the demographic study of the online students who take online classes, and particularly the smaller group who take only online classes, skew considerably older and much more female than our student body as a whole. The typical online student at a community college is a 30-year-old mother, working mom. And in which context the idea of online makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
Work during the day, be with the kids go to bed, then you go online. And that's exactly what happens. They have slightly lower course completion rates than the on-site students, but their graduation rates are slightly higher, which is kind of a paradox. And I'm still trying to figure that one out. There's been some studies done on that, and I haven't quite figured it out. The piece I'm concerned about with online, other than the quality part, which is improving, is the achievement gaps by demographics. We have an achievement gap issue on most community college campuses. White and Asian students tend to complete at higher rates than Latino or African American students, and the gap is larger in online courses. I'm not completely sure why it's larger in online, but that's something that we're working on. We actually got a Title III grant to work on that. I have some faculty who say, well, yes, and therefore to hell with online learning. I kind of think that ship has sailed. Online is here. The demand is here. It's a fact of life. You can like it or not, but it's here. So to me, the right response is not to hell with it, but rather, how do we do it better? If we have this medium that suits a lot of people's needs, but somehow falls short in terms of quality, how do we improve the quality? I get annoyed in the popular press. You'll hear, they think that for-profit means online and that community college means a campus. Most community colleges have online classes.
That's a terrific question, Jim. That you really dug deep with that one, and thank you, Matt. That's a terrific answer. This looks like a huge factor.
Oh yeah.
We have still more questions and more people who want to come up and join us online on the stage. What's the next one, Tara? Do we have? This is from Mark Corbett Wilson, one of our great stalwarts, who is a autodidacte who's building his own degree. And he said, I recently met someone teaching at 5 different California community colleges, 2 online courses at each college for a total of 10 classes. And he said it's not too much because he doesn't have to interact too much with the students. Wow. Mark, the rest of that got cut off. If you want to follow that up, either in the chat box or through the question box, please do. 'Cause, there may be a question at the end of that got cut off, but um, if you want to follow that up, so why don't we just hold on to that right now in case there's more.
Okay.
And Tara, while Mark is working on that, let's see what some other questions are that come up. We have one from Roxanne Riskin who wants to know what's the ratio of instructional designers per faculty member. I think Roxanne, for university versus community college.
Universities, as a rule, tend to be much better funded than we are, so they tend to have more support staff available than we do. Which, again, from a social justice perspective, I would argue is backwards. We take the students who need the most help and give them the least, as opposed to students at Williams or Harvard who need the least help and get the most. That is a struggle for us.
Well, it's a great question, Roxanne, and this comes back to your response to Ken O'Connor, which is how would you reinvent community colleges if you could? And your first answer was parity and per student funding across all of higher education. Tara, if you could bring up the rest of Mark's question, please, now that you've got that. So this is the person who talked about their adjuncting across all these different universities and colleges. And he said that it's not too much work for him because he doesn't have to interact with students. The money is really good and he has a flexible schedule. How common is this?
More than I would like. The problem, I think, is that we haven't yet come up with really good protocols for class observations for online classes. The standard way to observe a traditional class is you go and you sit in one day and you watch. And that works pretty well in terms of showing you faculty-student interaction. Are the lectures coherent? Are the students showing up? Are they engaged? You can kind of absorb that. With online, though, there's no sort of synchronous moment to watch most of the time. And so you're reading through posts. And it can be difficult to gauge the level of interaction as a student would perceive it. Also, in a state like California, where there's very heavy unionization, frequently the unions will negotiate the rules of observation. Yes. And their top priority is to protect their members. So they will frequently come up with rules that make it extraordinarily difficult to find certain things out in a way that you can actually act on them. Having said that, I think it's still true that we have a ways to go in terms of communicating expectations for online faculty. If I could talk to the publishers of the world, I would say, please stop doing EPACs. Please stop. Because EPACs are these prepackaged online course materials that a lot of faculty default to. And it becomes a kind of autopilot. It's not that they're necessarily bad, but they're canned. And students figure out pretty quickly that they're getting a canned course. And they start to tune out because why wouldn't they? It's kind of like watching TV as opposed to being engaged in class. I'm not a fan of that. I think if we're paying a professor, whatever the pay is, if you're the professor, your job is to engage with the students. Many do. We do have some who have found ways to cut corners, and that bothers me, honestly.
Well, as it should, given your position.
Yeah.
That's another subtle question, Mark. Thank you for doing that. I think we have a request to come up on stage. If we can beam Tom up on stage to join us, that would be great. Let's see if this works. If you haven't met him before or met, Tom worked for quite some time in the Houston Community College system. Did a lot of work. And there he is. Tom, can you hear us?
Hey.
Good to see you. Welcome.
Hi. I was director of technology for one of the colleges at Houston Community College for 16 years. And I wanted to know, so I personally think that community colleges are ideally placed in order to pivot in response to changes in the educational environment and the workforce environment. they're not as ossified as the four-year schools in some ways, and also they tend to be a little less constrained than the K-12 environment. So I've seen a lot of innovation around the country coming out of the community college sector, and I was just curious. First of all, if there was something that there's stuff that you had seen that you thought was particularly interesting in this regard, and also what you guys are doing at Brookdale that you think might have some legs as far as reinventing the game, because I mean, what you've been describing in many cases is a slowly losing game of drying up state funds and demographic challenges and all of that stuff converging to offer not a lesser product necessarily, but making the challenges to maintaining your quality and standards that much harder. So I'm just curious. At a certain point, I certainly personally don't like to beat my head against the wall at all, and so I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of walking around the wall, and I'll sign off and listen.
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. If I get going on things that are wrong, I can go for a while. But if I believed only that, I would have quit a long time ago. It's funny hearing from Houston Community College. When I was at Holyoke Community College, which was hcc.edu, we used to get a lot of your web traffic. They go looking for Houston to find us. Small college in Massachusetts, not the same thing. A couple of things. There's a move towards streamlining remediation that I think is outstandingly wonderful. Remediation has become a kind of quicksand for a lot of students. If they place into developmental or remedial courses, they often don't get out. And there's been a recognition among the community college sector, where this happens the most, that we need to come up with other models. So, for example, the accelerated learning program out of Community College of Baltimore County, which we've adopted here at Brookdale in the English department. Students take the remedial course in conjunction with the 100 level college class, and that it becomes kind of just-in-time remediation. Early results are encouraging. It does improve student outcomes. The other one, though, compared to four-year schools, we refer to ossification, which I take as code for age. Community colleges as a group are younger than four-year schools as a group.
I don't necessarily mean age as much as resistance to change.
Yeah. One thing the four-year schools...
Which are not necessarily the same thing.
No. The one thing the four-year schools have going for them compared to us is they've been much more aggressive and self-aware about courting philanthropy and courting their alumni and local people of means to support them. They have much more aggressive fundraising operations than we do in terms of philanthropy. And they've been much more savvy, frankly, about courting donors and getting community resources. Historically, community colleges have not done that. There are a few that have, but most have not. And we need to. You mentioned earlier one of the fastest growing demographics is people over 65. That is absolutely true where I am in Monmouth County. One can look at that as a challenge in the sense that they may not see the community college as their own, and so they may not tend to support it politically. But if you court them, they make wonderful mentors for students. They can become donors. They can become allies. They vote. The four-year sector has been much smarter about recruiting older adults as allies than the two-year sector has. We really have not made a point of it, and we should. I see a lot of upside to that and very little downside. There was a myth that I used to hear that if a student went to a community college and then transferred to a four-year school and then moved on in life, they would only donate to the four-year school. The myth was they'd only donate to the last place they went. But a fundraiser at a community college in Washington State, Lisa Scari at Highline, actually did some research and discovered that no, if the community college reaches out to them and asks, they will get donations. The problem is most of them don't ask. And that's an area in which we've been really slow on the uptake. We have not done a good job of that as a sector. Again, there are exceptions, but mostly as a sector, we have not. We need to. We need to take a page from the four-year playbook and say, if this is what it takes for nonprofits to survive, then this is what we need to do. And it's not just for the money, although that certainly helps. It's also for the clout and the connections. When you have powerful people in the community, pillars of the community on your side, legislators take your phone calls. When the biggest employer in town calls the state senator and says, "How dare you cut the college's budget? I need that training program and I need it now." Okay, we can do something with that. That carries weight. That's the kind of thing that the four-year sector has been much smarter about than we have. And for various historical reasons, we just didn't. We need to.
Great answer. And that's the kind of grumpy business person you want on your side. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Tom.
Thank you.
Another great question.
Thank you.
I'm really glad to see community college people speaking to community colleges here. Tara, do we have any more questions? I've got a couple more. But I want to make sure that everyone here gets to ask first. The redoubtable Fred Bashir asks, the community colleges have articulation agreements with MOOC providers such as Coursera. Or would this be a good idea? Well, can you flash that back, Tara? Yeah, this would be a good idea, giving credits for MOOCs. Could the community college supplement MOOC student learning experiences? Good question.
I would say it's the other way around. MOOCs can supplement community college learning experiences. We don't give credit for watching a MOOC because we don't give credit for watching a Ken Burns documentary. But we do give credit by exam for knowledge you've picked up wherever. So if you've picked up knowledge from life, or you picked up knowledge from a MOOC, or you've picked up knowledge from your own reading, and you pass a CLEP test or a departmental challenge test, we'll give credit for that. The area that you're getting at is called prior learning assessment. And it's the measurement of things that you've learned outside of college and then the conversion of that into credits. So the typical example is, someone's been working as an office manager for 10 years, shows up in the business program, and they say, okay, you have to take Computer Applications 101. And she says, what do you mean? I could teach it, right? If you can assess that and prove it, then give those credits and let the student move directly into the courses where they might actually learn something. We have not, as a sector, made that a priority, but we need to. And I think that's where the working adults would really benefit. Where we found MOOCs really helpful, Khan Academy has a whole bunch of very short MOOCs on like algebra and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That's useful in the math center, in the tutoring center. If you have a student who just gets stuck on, let's say, factoring or fractions is a big one for some reason. The tutor can direct the student to a particular video on Khan Academy that illustrates that concept, and the student can watch it 8 times in a row at 3 a.m. if she wants to. Mm-hmm. It's not a substitute for human interaction, it's a supplement to it. It's, wait, I missed that chapter, or wait, can you go over that again? With a human tutor, well, A, the human tutor has to be there, and B, they're humans. They get mad if you ask them the same question 6 times. But the computer, you can hit repeat all over and over and over and over again. They also work really well for students with learning disabilities, for whom sometimes note-taking is an issue. You can go back and rewind and watch. Oh, rewind, you're showing my age. If they go back and review, they can watch the video repeatedly or watch the part repeatedly that they missed. And it's okay. Nobody gets mad. So in the context where you have human beings sort of guiding them generally, snippets of MOOCs can be really helpful. They're useful tools. They are not substitutes for classes.
Something like textbooks or again, like Tommy Cat says.
Yeah. Like a video workbook.
Video workbook. A great question. And a really good answer. Tara, we've got a question from Vanessa Vale, a long-standing friend and participant of the Future Transform. Vanessa, so good to see you. She says, about higher education prospects in general and community colleges in particular for students in more isolated and usually less prosperous rural communities. There wasn't a question mark at the end, but I just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, that's a major issue. Every community colleges try to serve the employment needs of the community in which they're situated, which presumes that there are employment needs in the community in which they're situated.
Ouch!
Sometimes there aren't, and that becomes difficult because if your funding is partially local, but you're preparing students to leave the area, you're put in a really awkward position. You're asking local funders to support springboarding talent out of the local region. And sometimes they don't want to do that, and there are very good reasons they don't want to do that. One way that some community colleges handle that is through the development of either entrepreneurship programs or small business incubators. We have a small business development center at Brookdale, in which we try to keep people local and help them grow businesses. So if you have the kid with an idea, but no clue how to actually make it happen, you connect the kid with the idea to some local folks with business experience who can show them, okay, here's how you find funding, and here's what you need to anticipate in terms of, I don't know, land costs, labor costs, regulatory stuff, taxes. That can help. Just to give an example from my previous college when I was at Holyoke, our most successful alumnus was a former art major, Michael Goodrich, who in the early 70s was a student there, and he was obsessed with candles. I don't know why. And he founded Yankee Candle. And Yankee Candle is in every mall in America, practically.
Huge.
Made tons of money, gave $1 million back to the college to start the business center.
Wow.
If you had looked at labor market projections for Western Massachusetts in 1972, I doubt that candle making would have made the list. Sometimes it's a matter of sort of seeding the ground and seeing what takes. And the better community colleges in those areas have figured that out. And instead of only doing, transfer, which you still need to do, I'm still a fan of that, they also do the entrepreneurship piece. The places where I've found the greatest uptake for entrepreneurship are actually in the art programs. Graphic design, pottery, digital animation, photography, music. These students are going to have to hustle a living if they're going to do that full time. And hustling a living is another way of saying be entrepreneurial. They might not think they would not sign up for a business course, but if you take some of the business content, the entrepreneurship content to them, they're grateful for it. So some of the smarter ones are actually doing that now.
You heard that here, friends. This is a great case for the humanities, or at least for the arts.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Matt, I'm conscious of time, and this hour has flown past, and we're almost at the end. So I wanted to ask one last question, and to bring up something which we haven't touched on yet, which is about automation and community colleges. So on the one hand, if we look ahead, let's say a decade, do you think we'll see increasing use of automation within community colleges, software tools like, say, Duolingo? On the other hand, if automation really begins to hammer employment in the U.S.,
Right.
what happens to the mission of community colleges then? You have 10 seconds to respond. No.
Yeah, I had some counterpart when I went through the Aspen program last year. I had some counterparts from the Midwest who were in the program with me, who had very large and well-enrolled programs in truck driving. They train people to drive 18-wheelers, get the CDL license for an 18-wheeler, which in some regions is a pretty decent paying job and a respected gig. They were concerned that with the self-driving car starting to become a thing, 10 years from now, these truck drivers may be out of work. And are we training students for a sector that may be going away? We don't train elevator operators, and there's a reason for that. That to me is a major issue. I don't know where the next wave is going to hit. If I did, I'd buy stock in it. But we don't want to prepare students for jobs that are going to go away. So to me, that actually becomes an argument for some of the classic liberal arts classes and general education classes. I don't know what the next hot thing is going to be. I do know that the ability to communicate, that the ability to synthesize a lot of disparate information quickly, the ability to make decisions when you have partial information will continue to matter. I'm confident of that. There's a reason that even in the age of the internet, we still have a public speaking class. There is absolutely no substitute for getting up in front of a room full of people and talking. And if you don't believe me, watch a room full of undergraduates get up for the first time and try to talk. Stage fright is a very real thing.
Watch academics.
Yeah, absolutely. There are certain skills that are not going to go out of style soon. I think the ability to deal with people, the ability to communicate, basic literacy, numeracy, these things are not going out of style. Learning how to use a particular tool, that tool may go away. But learning how to learn and learning how to work with people, those are not going to go away. So I think we need to keep those and not let them get lost in the rush to be vocational.
In the chat box, we've had a quick running discussion about socialization in community colleges. Ken O'Connor and Roxanne Rickson and others were talking about the role of helping teach young people, so not older people, but younger people, how to socialize. But I think what you're describing is how to work with people in general, and we can do that online. We can do that face to face at community colleges. But you also just described a kind of classic liberal arts approach, at least and so it may be that the community college sector becomes the dominant liberal arts sector in American higher education.
I bristle a little bit when I read these articles about the crisis of the liberal arts because things. Number one, they always take 1970 as their starting point, and 1970 was an outlier historically. But the other is that if you look at community colleges, the largest major in America at community colleges is humanities, and it's growing. It's growing. The crisis of humanity is a 4-year sector problem, not a 2-year sector problem. Part of that is because here humanities often means gen ed requirements. And so a student who might be transferring onward for chemistry might still need to take psychology, math, English, history, and all of that. But I do think that part of it, there is some awareness that these liberal arts skills, and I hate to reduce liberal arts to skills because I think they're much more than that, but these liberal arts skills matter. When I taught at DeVry, I taught the political science and English classes, and these were two classes comprised of students majoring in telecommunications and local area networking. And they would often start with, "Why do I have to take your class?" And they weren't rhetorical, they meant it. And I would tell them, your technical skills will get you your first job. Your communication skills will get you promoted. So if you're content to stay at the help desk for $9 an hour for the rest of your career, then no, you don't have to take my class. But if you want to move into management, if you want to move up in the organization and start getting to where decisions are made and where salaries are better and where you can do more things, yes, you need the tech skills, but you also need to be able to write reports that people can read. And you need to be able to deal with difficult clients. And you need to be able to deal with difficult vendors. These are not just technical skills. I don't see the need for English composition going away, or public speaking, or math. I think these are going to continue, and if anything, accelerate. A lot of other tasks can be automated, but human communication cannot.
Well, I'm really glad that you were generous and rich enough to give us an hour of your human interaction, which has been,
Thank you.
Which has been brilliant. You have a lot of fans here. If you look in the chat box, you have a lot of people who are saying this is fantastic and cheering you on. I haven't looked at the Twitter stream yet, but no doubt there are a bunch of your quotes that are now in the Twitter sphere. Thank you so much. This is really a real treat. And we'll have the recording of this up maybe in about a week or so. I'll let you know.
Okay.
And I would love to follow up with you later on. In the
Absolutely.
meantime, everybody, keep reading Dean Dad. Keep reading the Confessions of Matt, because he's a terrific writer as he is a speaker. Thank you again so much.
Thank you, Brian. It was a pleasure.
Great. Well, I have to point everyone towards next week and what else that we're working on. So a couple of things. First, next week, we're going to be live at the EDUCAUSE International Conference. This is the biggest conference on education and technology. So we'll be in Philadelphia. So next Wednesday afternoon, keep an eye out for us. We'll be there. And if you're going to be at the conference, please say hi. Now, also, there's more to do. We're also going to be continuing our book club. And our book club is reading The Weapons of Mass Destruction. This past week, we read several chapters about higher education. And this week, coming up, we have a chapter also about education, math, and algorithms. It's a fantastic book. Please join us. And there's more, because if you want to find out more about us, go to ftte.us to learn about the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. If you'd like to learn more about this technology, go to shindig.com. And then I hope we'll see you next week. Thank you all for fantastic questions, and we'll see you online. Take care. Bye-bye.